again. So I'm asking myself, why is this important? Why thinking about psychology in the terms we are thinking in philosophical terms is important? Because I see, and you can tell, I live in the United States. I've been living here for almost 20 years. Before I lived in Australia for another 7 years. I was born in Chile. And I've seen how in different cultures, although globalization is taking over all these things, it's been increasing this difficulty to communicate with people. People are getting more and more like into this little cocoon, into this little bubble, with more fear, with less communication skills, less capacity of relate to each other. See the divorce rates and see what happened in the school system, the killings or the inner city. So the thing is that psychology is an irony because psychology was when became popular was in the after the First World War. Clinical psychology, well, first of all, was created 200 miles away from where I am broadcasting this thing, Athens, Ohio. It was in Pennsylvania, and it was a disciple of Dr. Wundt, and the name of this doctor was Leitner Whitmer, and he was the head of the psychology department at the University of Pennsylvania. This clinician, was the first person who established this psychological clinic. It was hard at the beginning to start with this because it was not really accepted. They preferred to think about psychology as scientific theoretical endeavor instead of like a real kind of clinical thing. But when it became really popular was after the First World War, because a lot of people, a lot of ex-soldiers or soldiers were coming back with what they call the name the shell shock. So they assume at the beginning that these people were like in distress because of the sounds of the shells, and it wasn't the case. The case was what now we call traumatic stress disorder. And so traumatic stress disorder was a psychological problem because these people were facing death and living under this horrible condition of war for so long. So war not only killed Germans, but also destroyed psychologically a whole generation of people, which became really more distracted or more distressed after the 1929 with the Black Friday. Okay, so the thing is, all these social elements that they are being the vehicles of the necessity of creating this discipline or this new way of assessing human health. So we have this evolution between in the West in psychology. So from the 19th century, the psychodynamics, which is the Freud's main idea, main theory, and which is very complex and very interesting, and it gives the basis for the research of the 20th century. And after that we have behaviorism. Behaviorism is really interesting, and because they focus on the behavior, and it's interesting too because, as I mentioned before, Bernays, with his idea of propaganda, he influenced the behavior of people, making them buying cigarettes and other things. And many companies hire him. Then after behaviorism was First World, Second War, and humanist psychology was, I wouldn't say was born, but Gestalt was starting with this new approach, and Gestalt started to think about the whole spectrum of human experience. So the Gestalt gave the origin to humanistic psychology, but not only to humanistic psychology, but also to social psychology. That is kind of forgotten, although in the 60s and the beginning of the 70s was really influential. But we have to see history. What happened in the 60s and 70s, it's really important. But all the Berkeley situation and the student situation in the United States, in 1968 in France, structuralism and then post-structuralism was born, particularly in France. But it was a movement all over the planet, against the Vietnam War. Many things that they were kind of annoying for establishment and the status quo. Who saved the day in the United States? Remember, it was Ronald Reagan. He started destroying the movement in Berkeley finally with destroying the People's Park. And there is a nice movie that you can really appreciate. It's Berkeley in the 60s. And then in the 80s, when Reagan became president, was Margaret Thatcher in England that took over. And then they tried these two major powers from the English-speaking world. So, and the English-speaking world that Churchill calls, it was the one that's supposed to have the torch of the leadership in the whole planet. And actually, psychology was also created and developed and thought over in the English-speaking world. One definition of clinical psychology is this one. The field of clinical psychology integrates science, theory, and practice to understand, predict, and alleviate maladjustment, disability, and discomfort, as well as to promote human adaptation, adjustment, and personal development. Clinical psychology focuses on the intellectual, emotional, biological, psychological, social, and behavioral aspects of human functioning across the lifespan in varying cultures and at all socioeconomic levels. If you hear that description it's about maladjustment and discomfort, adaptation, adjustment, and personal development. And how do you achieve these things? I think there are two ways to achieve these things. One is to adapt the subject to the medium, or to see the subject as part of the medium and being able to see and criticize the whole situation. So, for example, in the case of the First World War, we're gonna treat the soldier that they came, and then the family of the soldier, the children of the soldier, and everybody else, because they came here sick because of the shell shock. And then we're gonna find out that it was not a shell shock, but it was like a terrible situation that this human being was exposed, killing other people, and threatened to be killed in every single second of their life that they were in the trenches. So we have that situation, a social situation, a war situation. So these people get sick and get exposed to death, and then they transmit in this in the society that they are from this death. So it's a social problem. So psychology, clinical psychology, flourished in the world because of a social problem, the problem of war. Who talks about that? Nobody. Why? Because war is considered sacred. Why is considered sacred? Because nationalism was built into us to replace the idea of religion. So nationalism, nation is a secular being, a construct. Nobody denies that. It's nothing sacred with being a patriot, but the aura of sacredness is built behind it through the school system, through the family system, even through religion. In Chile we were about to have a war between Argentina and Chile, and one of the funny things that I felt at the time was the Catholic Church was supporting the Chilean army, And the Catholic Church was supporting the Argentinian army, and both with their virgins and both with their the discourses about the, I don't know, do it for God. So how do you explain that? The only way that you can explain that if that you don't have the big picture. That's the only way. But because if you go a little bit upper than that and you can see Argentina and Chile, you can see it's the same religion, it's the same God. How come it can be divided in these two elements that became enemies? And the only reason that I come with is that because it benefits to the ruling class of each country. Oh, I mean, they perceive that the benefit, the ruling class perceive themselves because they don't go to war. They send the little kids from the less advantaged families to die. And if these less advantaged families go to war because they don't have a job, now in the United States, for example, we don't have the draft here. So people that they need to go to university or because the situation they cannot get jobs or whatever, they go to work. So social psychology was eliminated from the spectrum in the 60s, 70s actually, but social psychology is paramount to understand the problems and to solve the problems of us. So if I have a problem that a compulsion or a phobia or a fear or whatever problem, whatever symptom I can have, and I go to a psychologist, and the psychologist going to start, connecting the dots and seeing that what happened with me since a little child. My parents were divorced, and then my mother had to work like crazy, so they have to send me here and there, to take care of. And on one of these things, they were like abusing me or not abusing me, or my mother was neglecting me, not because she didn't love me, but because she was too busy to give me enough time for my necessary development, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, I was emotionally crippled, and this crippledness was going to be shown when I'm going older. Of course, that at the beginning, people are going to say, well, everybody has a problem, everybody is here, everybody's there, but nobody's taking in consideration the context, because taking the context in consideration is almost an impossible task. We think we are ants, and ants cannot discuss the whole hype pro situation. This is an structure, this is established in such a way. Who gonna talk about that? Who gonna dare to talk? Unfortunately, I dare to talk about those things, and I know that there are people that they do dare to talk about those things, because if you see them, you can stop talking about them. You can stop talking about them, but you cannot stop thinking about them, because you see them everywhere. It's not like you are paranoid, because you don't see the same thing everywhere. You see this thing with different faces and with different but at the end you're gonna see the situation that there is pushing your way on this to the same through the same track. And that's probably the main thing. Globalization is doing that to us in every single way. And globalization probably is going to be responsible for massive craziness. But since massive craziness is not a bad thing because we have too many peoples in the world, well, that could be helpful to get rid of some of us. And I think that's the 21st century problem. And we should discuss just a little bit, but in the next video, about postmodern psychology, and then try to connect the dots again and see how unhappy or happy we can be